Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Onion Soup. And today I'm happy to have our guest on, Mr. Caleb Matthews. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Dexter. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing wonderful. It's a beautiful day out here. So I'm really excited to dive into, your expertise. You're an expert in human design, but more specifically, you have the SSB method, the soul, spirit, body method. So tell us about it and how you got started in it.
Absolutely, yeah. I've been public speaking, motivational teaching now since I was 18. So this has been a lifelong journey for me. And it's part of my design, part of my passion, part of my DNA of design. And the SSB method is something that has really resonated with me over the years, something that I've crafted into the audiences I've been in front of across the country, across the nations. And it stands for spirit, soul, and body. So it's the trichotomous worldview. And that's really what I want to offer people, is that we are all connected, our spirit, soul, and body. I believe that we are three-part beings. And one of the main battles in our culture, especially the Western versus the Eastern culture, is, in my opinion, the Western culture more focuses on the dichotomous, the mind, will, and emotions, and the body, so the mind and the body, but can neglect often the spiritual aspect. So I like to bring the C-link awareness, because that's part of the title of my business and my motivational speaking is the C-link, and the seeing the link between the spirit, the soul, and the body.
Interesting. We've talked a bit about human design on the show before. What's different about the SSB method that other people might not be used to when they think and hear about human design?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dexter. What's different about it is that it's a combination, and what I mean by that is it's three in one. Because my strong conviction belief is, as human beings, we have a spirit that has a mind, that has an avatar of a body, and people may not be familiar as much with this method because other methods may focus specifically on the spirit, the spiritual aspect, or the mental aspect, or the physical aspect. But bringing all three of those aspects into one container and being one whole unit is something that I think is more of a rare thing, especially in our Western culture. And I believe that this is something that is an ancient practice that has been established for thousands of years, especially in the three major world religions, in Islam and Judaism and Christianity. There is a healthy respect for the spirit, soul, and body. And myself, I'm actually Métis, so I'm Native American. And with Métis and the Native Americans, one of the things that the being that they call God or the Creator is the Great Spirit. And they treat the Great Spirit as if it's someone who they're talking to in the same room as you and I are talking to each other. And I think it's such a beautiful aspect that's been lost even through institutional religion, even through Westernism, where we see in social media, we could turn on our social media and say, oh, look on Instagram, look on Facebook, look on X, and you see, okay, you gotta hustle, work your body, work your mind. But the spiritual aspect, I think, is something that's often neglected.
Caleb, a lot of times people talk about the spirit and the soul. They mention them in the same framework, but you talk about them like they're different. So what is the difference between the spirit and the soul, and how can we better connect with those two individual identities?
That's a great question there. I would say the difference in my perspective between the spirit and the soul is by definition their functions. So here's what it is for me. So the soul is the mind, will, and emotions. It's where we have our human decision-making process from. It's where we put our will into something. We make a a contract. We make an agreement with our mind. We set our mind to something that we're going to do. Our spirit, in my belief, is something that is within ourselves, like an inner engine that we are created and born with. I believe that myself, yourself, and every person listening to this podcast and in the world is born with a human spirit, a fascinating design that is unique to them. Even in the world today where we have AI or cloning or things along these natures, what's really scientifically amazing is that you and I, Dexter, and our audience, it is impossible for our exact DNA down to the microscope to be fully replicated 100%. There can always be imitations, there could always be a cloning, there could always be AI, but as far as yourself and myself, I believe that our human spirit is something that we are born with at birth, and that is the inner engine where we draw our inspiration from, which is one of the reasons why I like to ask people when I'm doing public speaking sessions and podcasts or one-on-ones or group sessions, I ask them this question because you bring up spirit, the topic of spirit, and that is, what does spirituality mean to you? Because everyone's going to have a different answer, right?
Interesting. That I feel like my meaning for self-enlightenment and as I go on the spiritual path changes. So I can answer that with what it means to me today.
Yeah, yeah.
And today I say, spirituality is really for me this journey to get as close to source and God and have a awareness of all of that.
Mm.
And what does that mean? And that for me is ever evolving. But Caleb, with that being said, how do you use human design to help people redefine or define their outlook on spirituality itself?
Yes, yes, absolutely. The human design and how they look at spirituality, how people look at life, how do I use that? Well, I draw it back to the three C's, and I'm not sure if you've heard of the three C's, specifically the three cons. So there's construct, conform, and contract. And what I mean by that is when it comes to our design, you ask yourself, okay, Caleb, what do you mean by conform, construct, and contract? Well, when it comes to our design, each day as human beings, we make a contract with our spirituality, with our mental, physical framework. And we can either choose to conform to a world system or what the world thinks that we should be, or we conform to the image that we were born with and we pursue our path. So you talk about pursuing your path, Dexter. I talk about pursuing my spirituality and our audience pursuing theirs. And so how I help my audience is how to pursue their own individual spiritual, mental, and physical DNA that they were born with and not conform to what the world pattern thinks that they should be. Because how often do we see, do you see, Dexter, just on social media where they say, okay, in order to be successful, you got to have Alex Hormozy's method, or you got to have Tony Robbins' method, or you got to do this, this, and this, and then you'll be successful. Well, everyone's got a different definition of conforming to their image and their design. Because if I'm going to be Tony Robbins, I'm not going to do a very good job being Tony Robbins. If I'm going to be Dexter, I'm not going to do a good job being Dexter, but you'll be a good job being Dexter. Tony Robbins will be a good job doing Tony Robbins. You get my drift. But I wanted to bring up a story. And have you ever watched the show House of David on Amazon Prime before?
No, I haven't.
Have you heard of the show?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah. And are you familiar, and I want to ask our audience as they're listening, are you familiar listening with the classical historical tale from ancient folklore of the battle between David and Goliath?
Yes, definitely. Very familiar with that.
Yeah, so you have the shepherd boy, the underdog versus the big hulking giant. They think surely the giant's going to squash the shepherd boy with the sling and the staff. But what most people don't know about this story is the entrance into the battlefield. And I'm going to just to take us briefly through this, because I only know we have so much time. And that is King Saul, who heard that David was willing to challenge the Goliath, because Goliath was asking for a champion to step forward from the battle lines to challenge him and his right to hand-to-hand combat. And nobody was willing. King Saul wasn't willing, his son Jonathan, nor the army was willing to fight Goliath. But David said, I'm willing. And they all thought, oh, you're crazy. Like, you're going to get squashed. And finally, he convinces them that his God, his creator, his spirit will protect him on the battlefield when he faces the giant. So Saul says, okay, you can face the giant, but here's the prerequisite. Here's the requirement. You have to take my armor. And David, I'm not sure, as I said, Dexter, if you're familiar with this part of the story, but David says, I can't wear this armor. I'm not used to it. And he said, I have to do what I have, which is my staff, which is my sling. I have to use what I'm designed for, not this armor. And I bring all that up to this point, and that is, our world is very much like King Saul towards David in today's culture. It's constantly trying to conform us to its armor, saying, unless you do this, unless you agree to a contract of conformity, then you're not going to be successful. And part of what I do with the link, seeing the link between spirit, soul, and body for the audience, is to encourage them to walk in their own individual armor and not have to feel like they have to give into the peer pressure of somebody else's armor. Because when you are walking your design, I'm walking in my design. All of us are walking in our design. It's my strong belief that we are going to be the most effective as human beings.
Oh, I love that. You know, Caleb, I love how you allegorically broke down the battle between David and Goliath. So how do you help people to even recognize their own tools, such as David having his tools that he knew he could use in battle, where other people thought those tools that he were going to use weren't strong enough, weren't sufficient? People in today's world might think that the tools that they've been given and presented throughout their lives aren't sufficient to succeed, and a lot of people don't even have a really good definition of their own success. So how do you help them define what success is for them, and then to use the tools that they've been given to succeed in that process?
That's great. That's a great question there on that. I love that segue. This is great. Popcorn. We're getting into some good stuff here.
I'm all about it.
Yeah, I love that popcorn, that bubbling of the popcorn. Here it comes. I would say the way that in my method that I help people in discovering their tools, like David when he fought Goliath, and that is within the DNA of design. And that's something that I believe in strongly within the C-Link and what I offer the audience. It's one of my core pillars of what I teach is the DNA of design. How I help people with that is for them to help discover their primary and their secondary functions, abilities, and giftings. It's my personal belief and my perspective, and you may have a different perspective, audience may have a different perspective, but my perspective is that every human being has a primary strength, a primary gift, and a secondary gift. So one of the things that I do within the DNA of design model and method, within the spirit, soul, and body, SSB method, is a helping of a discovery of what those giftings are. And how I tie that back into spirituality, and the reason why I think spirituality is so important, and Dexter, I know for you, I can see in your life it's very important, is that without that connection to the spirituality, without that connection to our higher power, to the creator, the great spirit, whatever language a person has for it, it's going to be very, very extremely difficult to find those primary and those secondary giftings. And so I guide the audience and help guide the audience into really digging deep within their spirituality, within their own past, within their own background, within their own functions and their abilities, and to be able to discover what they have and say, okay, Caleb, well, how does that work? Like, I don't even know where to begin. Well, one of the things that one of my mentors taught me many, many years ago when it comes to discovering gifts, he would often say this: what do you have in your hand? What do you have in your hand? And what do I mean by that? Well, when I was driving home today from the gym, actually right before preparing for this amazing podcast it's called, I saw a man that was on a skateboard, and I looked closer and he had no arms and no legs. No arms and no legs. And he was using his gimpy arm to be able to actually give himself momentum to push that skateboard onwards. And I could see his determination in his eyes. And he wasn't letting the fact that he didn't have arms and legs stop him from getting to his destination. He wasn't letting his limitations define who he was. And in that regard, I would say to the audience, what do you have in your life? Maybe you don't have arms and legs like the man I saw on the sidewalk. Maybe you just have stories to tell people. Maybe you have expertise and knowledge. Maybe you're an athlete. Maybe you're a singer. Maybe you are an artist. Whatever you have that you are passionate about, that brings you joy. One of the things I will ask people is, what is something that you did growing up or something that you do now that brings you incredible joy? And I let people elaborate on that. And when they do, usually they can find slowly that guidance to that path of really those giftings and those functions and abilities.
Ooh, wow. You mentioned the destination and getting there regardless of if you have a hindrance, but you're going to get there if you have the determination. And you also mentioned going back and looking at your past. But let's talk about the journey in the first place. How do you help someone that's currently on the journey and they want to be on that path, not look at their past with any form of judgment and to be able to integrate whatever traumas or experiences into their lives to help sharpen those tools?
Yes, I would say, just to use an example, maybe somebody's past was negative. Maybe somebody had a traumatic upbringing and experience. Are you familiar, Dexter, with the two sides of the coin theory?
Which one?
Well, the flip side, I would say, so if somebody has a really bleak past, let's just say that, we'll say Matthew, we'll say made up character. Matthew, say I'm sitting down with Matthew, I'm trying to help Matthew out, guide him towards what he's got in his hand and that determination to get through where he is and not be stuck up with what's in his past. And maybe Matthew's story is just full of emotional and spiritual abuse. Maybe he had some really poor upbringing within culture and within religious frameworks or structures or spiritual structures. I would say the flip side of that is interpreting the opposite. And this is something that I use within dream interpretation as well too. When people are sharing dreams with me, and maybe it's a dark dream or a negative, and everything's negative. It's like, well, if there is a negative, then there's a positive application, and there's a flip side to interpret the opposite. Because what comes against you, what comes against me, I firmly believe, defines us and speaks of our strength. Our obstacle becomes our arsenal. So for Matthew, I would say, okay, he's had a lot of these structures of abuse. I would say for him that the way I would encourage him is that there is a leadership ability within his life to be able to actually change the dynamic, to not conform to a groupthink mentality that is upon his life that he has potential for. He just hasn't discovered that yet, and to help him guide him through being able to push back against whatever force that there is that's trying to muzzle his voice. Because I'm a firm believer that when you share your voice, Dexter, I share my voice, our audience shares our voice. When we share our unique DNA design, our voice, that is the most powerful thing we can give to the world, in my opinion.
Ooh, that's it. Chills up my spine. I love that because I love the idea of being in the darkness and recognizing that there is always still a light there. And I love this dualistic framework that you've developed, saying that, well, I understand that you're recognizing the trauma or the pain, the hurt, but the flip side of that is what did you learn from it, and how can we use that in order to get you to that aforementioned destination?
Absolutely.
You know, as we're talking about this DNA framework for human design and the patterning, I find it interesting how you haven't mentioned the mechanisms behind human design, such as the generator and things like that. It doesn't seem that it plays such a vital role in the SSB method as it does in the other methods of human design.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that to the method that I'm in, and I think this is what's going to make it stand out, is that I'm encouraging the audience, my audience, to be able to explore their version of spirituality and then their version of being able to take that spirituality, funnel it into their mental, emotional capacity, and then walk that out physically. I like to use the three legs of the stool analogy. Dexter, I just wanted to ask you a question. What happens if each of those legs of the stool represents spirit, soul, and body? What happens if one or two of those pegs are removed?
Well, I'm just gonna move my foot and adjust my balance, but most people probably fall.
Most people would probably fall. And would you say it's fair that in our culture today, in the Western culture and the Eastern culture, we live in a culture of extremes where people can often emphasize too much on maybe the spiritual, too much on the physical, too much on the emotional. And what do you think happens when somebody focuses too much on the spiritual or the physical or the mental or the emotional, and they don't take advantage of those two other areas? What do you think happens if there's too much emphasis in one area?
Yeah, for sure. Just like the three stool, you tend to fall because you oftentimes get polarized in one area.
Exactly. And I believe that Western culture, we live in this hustle culture where it's like, okay, you have to drive and hustle, get your physical being all revved up to go, or your mental being to, okay, I got to consume knowledge. And am I saying that being physically active and having mental capacity and understanding is an evil or bad thing? No, I'm not. But if it's only those two things and there's no spiritual dynamic, there's no inner anchor, then we limit our capacity. We limit that SSB model. We limit that spirit, soul, and body interconnected framework that we've been designed with, in my belief, from birth. The same thing if we focus on the spiritual. If we're sitting there and we're just meditating all day, and just meditating and praying, but we're not actually applying it mentally or physically, we're not doing the world any good either, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
No, I 100% agree with you. And it's actually one of the, I hesitate to say issues within the spiritual community, is that oftentimes people get so in their upper dantian or to the upper chakras that they're polarizing their minds, but you're not utilizing, I would say, or being a part of society or community as a whole.
Mm.
It's more beneficial to your own spiritual growth and societal growth to take what we've learned and integrate that not just within ourselves, but to the world as a whole, acts of service and doing things that can help others grow. I love how you don't stick or adhere to such a rigid construct. Not that I view human design or any other makeup to be completely rigid, but I do think that people get so hyper fixated on this idea of being a projector, for instance, which is what my human design says that I am, that being a projector, that they don't look outside of that and try to grow beyond the structure. This has been wonderful. Okay, look, we only have a few minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience before we go?
Sure. I'll leave the audience with just a few things. One kind of activation, because I like to leave people off on activation. But by the way, if you're interested in hearing more, you're like, oh my gosh, like I love what Caleb's talking about. You can find me at www.calebmatthews.net. That is where the C link is. I actually just launched that website, even though I've been doing public speaking for since I was 18, but I've customized it, modernized it, and everything that I do, including speaking on wonderful podcasts like The Onion Soup, Docker Wonders with Dexter. I'm open for bookings, everything like that, public speaking engagements, you name it, one-on-one sessions, group sessions. I love it. But that's where you can find me at calebmatthews.net, the C link. And then also the itinerary oasis.com. I do have a business down in San Jose del Cabo, Mexico, where I rent out my place for digital nomads and business professionals. So if you want to have a work getaway vacation, then look me up there as well. But here's the final thing I want to leave you with. And by the way, Dexter, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to say that before I get to this final activation. And this is the final activation would be the breath, the spirit, because I believe that the spirit of life, of the creator, of God, you name it, comes from the breath. And there's a really cool name for it in the ancients, and it's called the Kadosh Ruach Yah, which is translated holy breath of God. And that's what I want to leave you with, is that breath of God. And so I just want to encourage you and speak to your human spirit. And if you're comfortable and listening to this podcast, just keep on listening, close your eyes, open your eyes, put your hands in front of you, do whatever you need to do. But I believe that there's just an awakening right now within the spiritual side of things, the spiritual, the emotional, and the physical, the SSB, but within the spiritual, to activate that engine of your entire being. So I just speak the Kadosh Ruach Yah, the breath of God, into your being and awaken into your being, to everybody, to Dexter, to your listeners, to everybody, to be able to add to the fuel that's in your life, that you reach the purpose to which you were created on this planet, your DNA of design, that your cup would be overflowing, not half full, not empty, but overflowing with that Kadosh Ruach Yah, the Spirit of God that would guide you to every single open door that's supposed to be open, and whatever door is not supposed to be open would close. And may the Kadosh Ruach Yah, just breathe it in, breathe it out. That dunamis, that exousia, that energy, that Spirit of God energy, let it flow through your spirit, into your mind, into your body. That not being conformed to the world pattern, but being conformed by the transforming of the renewing of your mind, and that contract with the Spirit of God, with the Kadosh Ruach Yah, walking it out in your body, that you would fulfill everything that you would put on this earth to do, and that nothing would be left to waste, and that good things are for you. I want you to hear, someone needs to hear this right now, that good things are for you. Good plans are for you. Good doors are open for you. Your DNA design is welcome on the earth. Your giftings, your abilities, what gives you joy, those leadership functions within your life, your voice. I welcome your voice into the earth. If no one has ever told you that right now, you might be listening to this podcast and again, no one has ever welcomed my voice. I speak to your voice and say, your voice, your perspective, your DNA of design is welcome on the earth. There we go.
Wow, that's just beautiful. I have to tell you, we have had a few human design people. This has been the best, not just best explanation, but you went so much deeper with everything, and I truly, truly appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on, Caleb. This has been wonderful. And I want to thank you all for tuning again to this episode of Onion Soup. We will leave all the links to his site and where you can find him in the description below. As always, have a blessed rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.